Hi, it's Penny here, and today we're going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in both September and October. Honestly, September was a pretty terrible reading month for me. I only read 4 things, but then I read like another 6-ish in October, so we'll combine them. I am going to do this book battle style as I usually do, where I pair up all the books, I battle them against each other until we come up with the best book of the month. But of course, in this video, we'll have 2 best books of the month. So let's start off with the books I read in September, and we're going to start with the fantasy books. So we're going to put Heir to Sevenwaters by Juliet Marillier up against A Crown of Swords by Robert Jordan. Heir to Sevenwaters is the 4th book in the Sevenwaters series, and this one I think follows the granddaughter of the woman from the first book and the niece of the person from the second book. Not sure about the relationship with the third book, but basically this series is a family saga based around Celtic mythology, and it's always really tragic. The characters are put in really difficult situations where they're trying to balance both what's good for their family against what's good for everyone else involved, and also what's good for themselves. All those 3 things don't always match up. And I really love how Juliet Marillier conveys those emotions and shows how everything is connected. So in this particular one, we're following this girl named Clouda. Not sure of my pronunciation. I did listen to the audiobook though, I've just forgotten. And the audiobook narrator I thought had a lovely Irish accent, but I'm not Irish, so I probably can't judge. And this girl, everyone else in her family kind of knows what's happening with them. There's this prophecy about who's going to inherit, and she's just trying to figure out where she's going to fit in. Probably she's expecting to get married and look after a household, and she's okay with that. But then these boys arrive and she finds herself attracted to the one that she wasn't expecting to be, but also sometimes he's not very nice. But as always, there's more to the story. So these are fairly romance focused stories, but I like the way the romance is done, and I don't think it overshadows the plot completely. This particular book as well has a lot of like the fairies. Not sure of my terminology there, don't know enough about Celtic mythology, but there is a child who ends up getting kidnapped, and she has to go off with this other guy to try and save the child, and they end up in this very magical world with all these inhuman beings. I also really like how this story has a lot of different Celtic stories built into it, and storytelling itself is a big part of this world. So I do think though, the first book in the series was still my favourite, but this was a pretty good one. Which was good because the 3rd book in the series disappointed me a little bit. So I'm glad to see maybe it's getting better because I've got 2 more books to read in this series. Then we're putting this up against A Crown of Stars by Robert Jordan, which I think is the 7th book in the Wheel of Time series. A Crown of Swords. Did I say A Crown of Stars? That's a different series. I can never remember. But the problem I have is that at this point, I don't care about the Wheel of Time anymore. And I'm really annoyed because I want to keep reading it, because I want to get to the Brandon Sanderson books and I want to know what happens. Do I care? I'm not sure if I actually care. So I read A Crown of Swords and I could not tell you a single thing that happened. But I listened to the audiobook for this one too, and I think my strategy is going to be that in the new year I'm going to try reading it physically, because I read the very first book in that series physically, and then I've read every other one in audiobook, and I've just really struggled to pay attention and to care, and maybe it's the audiobooks. I think it's the books, but we're going to try, see if the physical books can bring back my attention, and at least maybe I'll know what's happening. I'm a little bit scared that nothing's really happening, but so many people rave about the series. Something must be happening, right? I don't know. Anyway, if we're putting these 2 books up against each other, I feel like it's obvious that I'm going to pick Heir to Sevenwaters because it was just more memorable and like just a much better story, so much more emotional impact, and the characters felt more real and fully developed, like just better in every way. And it wasn't even a favourite, but still so much better. Then the other 2 books that I read in September was Heir by Kiersten White and Turncoat by Jim Butcher. So Heir is a thriller. We're following this girl who enters this competition, like a hide and seek competition at this abandoned amusement park, and she's kind of gotten pulled into this because she's really desperate for money, and you learn a lot about the other characters too and why they're there, and maybe there's a connection, and maybe when you finally figure out what's going on, it's not very good. that seems to be the opinion of a lot of people, and it was the opinion of me. I just feel like a lot of these thriller type books that tease supernatural elements, like is it supernatural or is it not? I'm not telling you whether it is or it's not, but a lot of them that tease supernatural elements don't do enough with those supernatural elements to make it interesting to someone who reads actual supernatural fantasy books. And so I feel like maybe people who just read thrillers would be like, wow, those supernatural elements were really cool, when actually for a supernatural book, not really. But also I wonder if people who like thrillers will be like, well, I didn't want those supernatural bits. For me, I have discovered I really don't like books that don't tell me if it's supernatural or not. I just want to know. Like, don't make me wonder. Tell me what kind of book I'm reading and then I'll know what to expect. But these books that are thrillers, teasing supernatural elements, don't give me the thrills I want. They don't give me the supernatural elements I want. However, that makes it sound like I hated it. I don't think I hated it as much as some people. Like, it was okay. The main character had some interesting ideas. There were some interesting decisions made with the writing style that I don't think were very good. That's probably my biggest criticism, is that it kept jumping between different kinds of perspectives with no real clear structure. Anyway, overall, not that great. I don't think I can recommend it. Then the other book I read was Turncoat by Jim Butcher. This is the 11th book. I'm going to say it's the 11th book. I don't actually know. Let's say the 11th book though. No, is it the 10th? Whatever. The something book in the Dresden Files. I've read a lot of these books now and it's not my favorite series. But Turncoat, I didn't mind it. I think this one actually had a good balance of an interesting story, did interesting things with the characters. It introduced a new element, like a new supernatural creature that was actually quite interesting and had interesting consequences. I've used the word interesting a lot. That's because Dresden Files are normally quite boring to me, but this one I didn't mind, and I felt the way the action was paced worked well. The way things kind of escalated was interesting. Now I'm thinking about it more and I'm like, am I thinking about the right one? I read too many of these in a row and it's broken my brain. Yeah, this is the one. I liked it. Basically, there is a guy who Harry has never gotten along with, and that guy comes to Harry for help, and they end up having to work together a little bit. It set up some interesting things, and then unfortunately burnt them all to the ground and didn't continue with any of that in the next books in the series. But this is one of the ones that I actually kind of liked. Unfortunately followed by two that I really, really hated and were my least favourite. But that's not the point. Right now we're talking about Turncoat. And I think it was one of my favourites of the series. Still not surpassing my favourite number 7 though. Anyway, if I am putting these two books up against each other, I honestly don't know. I'm going to look at my spreadsheet. Okay, Turncoat, I gave a solid 3. And Heir, I gave a solid 3. So neither of them that great. I guess it doesn't matter. I think I'm going to pick. I could go either way. I start the sentence and I still don't know which one I'm going to pick. I think I'm going to pick. I'm trying to think of just one reason why one is better than the other. I think they both had similar kind of action scenes. Maybe Dresden was slightly better. Okay, I took so long to make that decision that my battery died on my camera. But I think I've decided I'm just going to go with Turncoat just because this is the last Dresden File book that I'm probably ever going to enjoy, so let's give it some credit and let it win a battle. But now I am going to put Turncoat up against Heir to Sevenwaters to decide the best book of the month in September, and obviously Heir to Sevenwaters is going to win just because I'm so much more engaged in those characters. And it is another one with supernatural elements, but I much more enjoyed the magical world and the way those supernatural elements created challenges for the humans involved and just so much more emotionally impacting. So, Heir to Sevenwaters, the best book I read in September. Even though, to be honest, it was only a low 4, so not the best reading month in September in terms of numbers or ratings. Wait till I do my yearly reading stats, you will see. Things took a dive in September. But October was slightly better, so let's talk about October's reading. Firstly, I do want to mention I reread the first 15 lives of Harry August. I've decided that rereads aren't eligible for my best book of the month because otherwise this year, not having been a great reading year, rereads would have been winning all the time. So the first 15 lives of Harry August, if you don't know, is about this man who discovers that when he dies, he is reborn into his life again. So same time, everything's the same except for the decisions he makes. And the decisions of others also have an impact. So I think on like his 8th life, when he is an old man, this young girl comes to him and says, the end of the world is coming, it's getting sooner and sooner, so we're passing this message back through people who are able to live their lives over and over again to let you know that something's going wrong. Can you try and figure out why the end of the world is happening? Because otherwise it's going to keep happening earlier and earlier until it impacts your life. And with these people, if anything happens to stop them being born, then they actually die. So they keep it a big secret about where they were born. And this particular character has some lucky elements of his life that means it is a bit hard for people to track him down. But he also kind of ends up forming this friendship with a man who is very related to what's happening. I actually felt like I enjoyed this book a lot more on the reread just because I knew what was going to happen, and so I could pick up a lot more on the hints along the way. Also, it's been a little while since I read a good time travel book, and I really love this looping life kind of concept. Anyway, let's get into the battles for October. Firstly, I've got a couple of science fiction-y type books. We've got The Relentless Moon by Mary Robinette Kowal up against Before Your Memory Fades by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. So firstly, The Relentless Moon. I bought this a while back and it's taken me ages to get to it. And also, I think I actually started this in September and then put it down and then continued it multiple times. I put it down. Not because it was a bad book, but just because of my mental issues at the time. But also, I would say there's a lot going on in this book series. So this is the 3rd book in the Lady Astronaut series, although you don't necessarily have to have read the previous books to pick up this one, although it would give you some context, so I'd probably recommend it. In this one, we are following this woman who is the wife of the governor who is likely going to be a future president, but also she's an astronaut. And she's very involved in this colony that's being built on the moon. Actually, what I should say, this is set in like the 60s. So this is an alternate history where a meteor hit the Earth just around the time humans were starting to explore space. And because this meteor has hit the Earth, our world is going to become very quickly uninhabitable. Very relatable. But of course, a lot of people don't really believe in it. And so while government is putting a lot of money into trying to fund space exploration and setting up a way to live off the planet, a lot of people feel like that's a waste of time, especially as there are more and more natural disasters and just like climate issues where people think that governments should be focusing on the issues on Earth. But it's kind of funny because it's those issues on Earth that are making it even more important for humans to get off the Earth. Anyway, it's all very relevant to modern times, even though it's set back in the past. As well, it's set around the time of the polio outbreak, so there's a lot in here about vaccination and the whole anti-vax movement, which back then, also relevant, now also relevant. There is also a theme in here. The main character suffers from anorexia. I don't know how I feel about how that was handled, but it was okay. Talked a lot about how anorexia isn't always about like thinking that you're fat. It can also be just like a way of dealing with trauma and trying to get control over things. And our main character, while dealing with that and just like the general stress of everything that's going on, is on the moon trying to find out who is sabotaging the moon colony. So there's a lot in this book, but I did feel like it was fairly well paced given everything that it's trying to cover. But I do think that I made the right call not to rush through this because I think it's something you need to read more slowly and kind of take in what's happening. But I do like Mary Robinette Kowal's writing style. It's very straightforward, but somehow makes the characters seem very relatable, even if you don't have much in common with them. Like, when have I gone to live on the moon and been in a leadership position like that? Never. Anyway, I like this. It's a good continuation to the series. I know there's going to be at least one more book. I'm not sure what's going to be happening in that book, but I'm sure I'm going to enjoy it. Then the other book I read was Before Your Memory Fades. This is another 3rd book in a series, actually. So the first book was Before the Coffee Gets Cold. So this is a story where there is a cafe. If you go to this cafe at certain times, there is a seat you can sit in where you can travel back in time. However, when you go back in time, you can't leave your seat and you can only stay there until the coffee gets cold. And as well, the rule is that you won't be able to change anything. So nothing you do in the past will change the future. And for the first book and somewhat the second book in the series, I was very impressed with the stories that Toshikazu Kawaguchi writes, that without changing the past, somehow going back to the past does impact what's happening now. And a lot of the stories are very emotional with really great messages around death and depression. And I really loved the first book. Second book I wasn't as sure about. The third book was really a disappointment. In fact, I had the last 5 pages of this book to read and I just left them there for like ages because I couldn't be bothered finishing it, because I didn't care about anything that was happening. I feel like a lot of the stories were just rehashing the same themes and the same kind of stories, and it was really trying to bank on your attachment to the characters from the first 2 books, but I don't think I was attached enough for that. So unfortunately, that one was a bit of a disappointment. So if I'm putting these 2 books up against each other, obviously I'm going to pick The Relentless Moon because I got a lot more out of it. Okay, then we've got 2 magical books. So firstly, we've got We Are Magic by Sarah Gailey up against Greywaren by Maggie Stiefvater. So We Are Magic is a very short audiobook that I picked up following a group of girls in high school who all have magical abilities. And right at the very start of the book, one of the girls kills her boyfriend at the prom magically by accident, and they're all working together to try and cover things up. But a lot of this book was really just about identity and that teenage experience, and while I didn't mind it, it wasn't very relevant to me. I do think I would have really enjoyed this as a teenager, but also, as I said, this main character kills this boy, and I didn't feel like that was ever properly addressed in the book, and I think that that's the key thing that made me not like this book. Otherwise, I think I could have really enjoyed it if just a little bit more had been done to be like, wow, I killed this boy. That's pretty bad. So yeah, it was fine, but a little bit problematic. Then we have Greywaren by Maggie Stiefvater. So I actually reread Call Down the Hawk and Mr. Impossible in preparation for this release. So those are the first 2 books in the Dreamers trilogy, and this is the final one. The Dreamers trilogy itself is a spin-off of the Raven Cycle, which is a book series that's loved by a lot of people. I don't know if as many people have read the Dreamers trilogy or even enjoyed it as much. In a lot of ways, it's very different, whereas the Raven Cycle is very focused on this friend group and like these teens getting to know themselves. The Dreamers trilogy is much broader in scope. It is still about characters trying to get to know themselves and the impact of magic on these people, but in a very different way. So basically in this series, there is a kind of magic, and there are people who believe that this magic is going to be the cause of the end of the world. So they are using these people who can prophesize the future, even though that's magic, but they're using these people to try and identify people who are using magic and kill them before they can do anything that's going to end the world. I really love the way that Maggie Stiefvater developed the magic in this world. The only thing I would say about this final book is I think it really focused on the characters that I was least interested in. I wanted a lot more time with Ronan and his brothers, Ronan being one of the characters from the Raven Cycle series. And to be honest, it's not even Ronan that I necessarily wanted more of. I would have liked more of his brothers Matthew and Declan. And as well, there is a character called Jordan, and just the whole concept of her is so interesting. And I didn't feel like that was developed as much as I would have liked. It's very hard to talk about this book without spoilers. But what I will say as well is there is a lot of art in this story. So both Jordan and Hennessy and some other characters in the series are art forgers, and along the way they start learning to make these kind of magical art pieces. But there's a lot of references to actual artists and art pieces in the real world, and it kind of links those real life works of art into this magical world, to the point where you start wondering, is the real world actually this magical world? And there's also a lot of cars in this book. So you can really see Maggie Stiefvater's love of both art and cars brought together in this book, all about magic and dreams and just people trying to live their lives in a magical world. I think if you like Maggie Stiefvater's really strange writing style and when she really takes a concept to another level, then you'll probably like this trilogy. I really enjoyed it, but I was a little bit disappointed in the end that it was the end and that we didn't get more. because I feel like there's still a lot more to be explored. But anyway, if I am putting these two books up against each other, I would still choose Greywaren because When We Were Magic was just a bit of a disappointment. Greywaren also disappointing, but like in a small, I can't believe this is the end kind of way. So Greywaren wins this battle. Then we're going to have two more books. So we've got Ruby Fever by Ilona Andrews up against Changes by Jim Butcher. Oh, it's another Dresden Files book. Let's talk about Ruby Fever first. Ruby Fever follows this family of private investigators in this world where people have psychic abilities, magical abilities, but they're inherited through genetics. And this is the final book of the second trilogy in the Hidden Legacy series. The first trilogy followed the oldest sister, and then the second trilogy follows the middle sister, Catalina, as she takes over this family just as they've been thrust into a position of power, but also a dangerous position because now that they are powerful, they're getting a lot of attention from other powerful people. I really love this world. The way that Ilona Andrews builds the magic is so realistic. Although I think actually my favorite thing about this series is just the family dynamics. So most of the characters are family members and they just feel like a real family. And part of me just loved spending time with this family for this series. And every time there would be like a little time jump and we would just be told about some things happening rather than to get to spend time with them experiencing it. I was a little bit mad. I do think this could have been a much bigger series and we could have got way more of stories in this world. I'm a little bit disappointed that we didn't, but there is still a chance that there will be a third trilogy following the youngest sister. And there were a few hints at the end about what might be happening in that trilogy. So I'm hoping we'll eventually get it. They have said they have plans, but they want to write some other books. So we'll see if they get to it. But I really enjoyed this series. I wasn't actually sure I was going to, and I've been putting off reading this series for a long time, even though Kate Daniels series by Ilona Andrews is one of my favorites. I just thought, looking at the covers, that this was going to be more of like an erotic romance, paranormal romance type series, but it is much more about the magic in the world and the plot than it is about the romance, even though there is a little bit of romance in there too. But not so much as would annoy me, who's not a romance fan. Alright, so then we've got Changes. This, I think, is the 12th book in the Dresden Files. And as suggested by the title, there are some changes. Right, I think even like the first sentence, we get something introduced that has a massive impact on Harry. But for me, I didn't feel like that impact was realistic at all. And he just turns into like his worst version of himself, where he's always like, I need to protect women, but they're not really people. Yeah, it's like Jim Butcher just decided to write a book that really focused on everything that I hate about Harry Dresden. And he just does a bunch of things that I didn't enjoy, I didn't think were good decisions, all for a reason that didn't feel like a good reason, or like maybe it would be a good reason, but not a good reason for Harry to have. I don't want to spoil it, but I really hated everything that happened in this particular book, and it just felt as well like it was like something major happened right at the beginning, and then we just mucked around for the whole book. Like most of it felt just like padding, like pretending to be investigating and having action, but none of it was actually important until the very end. And I just, honestly, I almost finished reading the series here, but I actually read one more book, which confirmed that I should have ended the series here, or in fact, I should have ended the series before this book. So anyway, if I'm putting these two books up against each other, they're both paranormal investigation type stories, because I haven't even talked about what the Dresden Files are about, but it's like Harry is a wizard who's also a private investigator, but it gets involved with this war between the Wizard Council and the vampires. The Fae are also very involved, as well as all sorts of other supernatural stuff. But then in Changes, everything changes to be shit, basically. Or at least that's my interpretation of what happened. So if I'm putting it up against Ruby Fever, where I love all the characters, I think the world and the magic are so creative and wonderful, and it's so easy to read, and it's so unproblematic. So I definitely pick Ruby Fever as the winner of this battle. So now we've got 3 books vying to be Best Book of the Month for October. Let's just put them all together. So we've got The Relentless Moon by Mary Robinette Kowal up against Greywaren by Maggie Stiefvater and Ruby Fever by Ilona Andrews. So before I read any of these books, I would have expected Greywaren to win just because the magic of that world is so amazing and I love Maggie Stiefvater's writing style. But then I was just that little bit disappointed in how things ended, or like disappointed in what things weren't included in that book. But there were parts of it that I absolutely loved. Whereas if we compare it to Ruby Fever, I really loved the magic of that, and I was very satisfied with the end of the series. And the things that I wanted more of, I feel like will be in the next trilogy. But also, like, if the next trilogy didn't come out, it would be okay. I still feel like things were complete. Whereas with Greywaren, I didn't really feel like it was complete. Honestly, let's get rid of the Relentless Moon. I really enjoyed it, but it's not a contender here. It's really between Greywaren and Ruby Fever. And I think if we just go by satisfaction, I'm going to have to pick Ruby Fever as the best book of October. I think the covers really put people off this series, or people that do pick it up would be expecting like erotic, smut romance stuff, and then they'll be disappointed. So like, please set your expectations realistically for this series. It's not smart, but it does have really cool magic and a really cool world and some great family dynamics and like a little bit of found family as well. I just really love it. So actually, I think we're going to pick Ruby Fever as the best book of October. Did I already say that? Honestly, I've been filming and so many times I've just forgotten everything that I'm saying. Oops. But anyway, we're going to pick Ruby Fever as the best book of October. We also picked Heir to Sevenwaters as the best book of September. I'm not going to battle them against each other. However, I will do, like I did last year, a book battle of all the best books of the month throughout the year. So then maybe we can work out what the best book of the year was. Even though I always know that decisions are so hard to make. But we'll see how we go. Do let me know if you have read any of the books I talked about in this video. I would love to talk with you about them in the comments down below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.